Hello and welcome to this game review. So in this one, we have a lot of kind of philosophical questions. Firstly, why are we giving up the center, right? So in the world of chess openings, there are basically two types of openings. There are classical openings and the hypermodern openings, right? So classical openings, you can think your normal like queen gambit declined, like e4, e5, Spanish, Italian, stuff like this. And the thing with classical openings is that we are trying to take the center with pawns and then reinforce it with pieces and basically play in the center very normally. But in this game you played a hypermodern opening. You allowed black to take the full center, and this is not something I would recommend at this stage of your chess journey because playing without the center is very uncomfortable because you have less space, your pieces have less squares, so you will have to be extra creative to make them work. Instead, against a Caro-Kann, I would probably just suggest playing d4, and you can play, for example, the exchange Caro-Kann, a very fixed structure. The pieces come out quite naturally, and there are very important plans which are important to know. So this is quite easy to study, and it makes sense because you're fighting for the center. Instead, what happened? You gave up the center, so this would be kind of a hyper-modern opening. So this is basically the King's Indian in reversed. And the point of hyper-modern openings is that we give up the center, but when we're ready, we start to strike back, and we strike back hard. So think of your Grunfeld defenses, King's Indian, Benoni, stuff like this, where white is allowed to get to the center. All the Indian defenses like Nimzo Indian, Queen's Indian. So here we will have less space, but we'll try to fight for the center, for example, by taking, playing c4, or with pieces, fianchetto with bishops, are quite decent if we can attack the center. But in this game, we do not really do much of that. So g3, and bishop g2, and castles. So now we have basically finished development, and we must do something. So we decide to take. And this exchange in a vacuum is not very good, right? Because you're exchanging the e4 pawn for the c6 pawn. So you better have something prepared. Otherwise, this is not justifiable. This pawn is definitely better than this one. But objectively, this is fine as long as you play the move c4. And the move c4 tries to exchange the c pawn for the d pawn. Also tries to get new squares for this knight on d2. And if this works out, then this is quite good for white. He can also play rook e1, attack this pawn, and the white has nice play. If d4, then this will now be a Benoni structure, so also we need to know a few different pawn structures. And this is a good version for white because this knight is slightly misplaced, it's usually on c6. White can start opening up his pieces with knight g5 and knight e4, exchanging some knights, and he has quite a comfortable game. So this is basically the only way to play at this point. Or you could just not take and try to develop and then delay the decision for later. But in either case, we must strike in the center, otherwise black will be able to consolidate. And if he consolidates his center, then we are simply clearly worse, right? The risk with playing modern openings, hyper-modern openings like this, is that we are allowing the opponent to have a long-term advantage. So if in the long term he is better, we must and absolutely must do something in the short term. So here b3 is a bit slow, and now black gets time to finish development, for bishop b7, and here you decided to play knight h4, knight f5, so this is a nice idea. I mean, you could play rook e1 as well to gain a tempo on the pawn, but okay, knight h4 and knight f5, but now knight e3, and again it seems it's time to do something in the center. Now if we play c4, this probably wouldn't be very smart because black in the meantime got to develop their pieces, and they can play, for example, knight c5, firstly attacking this pawn. And if we defended, for example, d4 would be quite annoying, and now this bishop is blocked. So now the same plan doesn't work as well because of the blocked bishop. Okay, knight e3, so now you're walking around with pieces, but as you will notice, pieces are not enough to get counterplay. So queen c7, now played knight f3, but this already allows black a huge positional advantage with d4 gaining even more space, and then putting the knight on d5, which will simply fix the pawn on c2 forever, and you will have no space for your pieces. The bishop on b2 is blocked and will not really have much to do. So this was already a huge blunder, and white's only chance is to again strike in the center, because after all, why did we develop our pieces like this? Why are we playing on free ranks? Especially as white, when we have the first move, we should be a bit more ambitious. But now we have no centers, so our only chance to not lose in the long term is to fight back as soon as possible. Because again, if black gets a few moves, we are basically lost because of the center and lack of space. Here d4. So black can react in a couple of ways. Our basic threat is to take and isolate this pawn, and then we will be able to have a target over here. So the most logical is to play here. And now he again has a lot of space, so if nothing happens, he will consolidate and he will be better. So we must do something, and c4 is that something, trying to undermine the pawn on d5 to create a weakness on e4. And again, white's pieces will have some kind of space. Rook c1, taking here. This is a weakness. White has decent chances. Tether knight f3. This is now a horrible position because, well, after b5 or b5 later, we have this weakness on c2. We have a completely dead bishop. We have a lot of minor pieces, which is not good for us because, for example, these knights taking away squares from each other. And the opponent has very simple play against the pawn on c2 and also the square on c3, which happened in the game. And from here, the opponent didn't give us many chances. So basically what happened was you played a hypermodern opening, the point of which is to give up the center and then fight back. But you missed the part where you had to fight back. You just gave up the center. So instead I would suggest not even giving up the center and trying to take as much as possible, especially with white, and not allow the opponent easy moves. As up until here, he did not really have to do anything, right? He took the center, he defended the center, and not much happened. But here, yeah, he played the idea of knight c3, getting a strong passed pawn here, dominating this knight. So the position is just lost because we're down a piece. This knight cannot really come out. And the opponent slowly but surely improved his position. And he did give some small chances, but nothing very special. But yeah, nothing really happened here. We're down in exchange. He has a strong pawn on c3. And the game is over. So quite an unfortunate opening. And this is kind of what happens when you don't fight for the center, right? After all, one of the opening principles is to control the center. And this is something that only black did. So he got a big advantage. So hopefully this was useful. And if you want any other opening repertoire suggestions, you can write me a message. But against the Caro-Kann, I would suggest not playing this passive line where you only have 3 lines. I would suggest pushing the pawn to d4, and then it will be up to the opponent to fight back. So hopefully this was useful, and see you next time.